Welcome, everyone. As I know, folks are still entering the room. We're just a couple minutes after 8:30, but I want to be respectful of your time and go ahead and get started with our conversation, our coffee this morning. I do wish this was in person and that we could be sharing coffee, but hopefully you've grabbed your favorite beverage and you'll be with us for the next bit of time. We've scheduled until 10 o'clock. We have a presentation and then we will have room for questions and answers. But before I get started, I want to introduce Dr. Waller, who has joined us this morning to give us a couple of words of friendship. Dr. Waller?
Thanks so much, Carolyn. I just want to say good morning to everyone. I'm definitely not the star of this show, so I'll be turning you over to my esteemed colleagues in the college office before long. But I will say, with one daughter coming out of college in the spring and the other in application as a senior in high school this year, this is an amazing journey, and it certainly has its ups and downs and challenges, but it's also a time when I think students really come to know who they are and to have ideas about where they want to go that are really important for their development. And Carolyn can certainly tell you that I've certainly in our standing meetings had my questions for her about my youngest, and I felt very well supported. And so you're in good hands, and I hope you buckle in and have a good ride. Take care.
Thank you so much, Dr. Waller. I realized that as I started talking, I didn't even introduce myself. So let me start by doing that and introduce my colleagues. Then we'll talk a little bit about what the agenda is like for this morning. I'm Carolyn Middleton. I'm the Director of College Counseling at the Berkeley Carroll School, obviously. I came to Berkeley Carroll I'm in my 5th year now. So I came in 2016 and came from the college side, though I've worked at 4 different colleges and universities, 5 actually, when I count my advising time, and then 2 other high schools. And I love being on this side of the desk, to be honest, because it's really wonderful to help families understand the process. I was reading a book just this morning about the college process, and it was written by Jeff Salingo, who's written a number of different things about colleges, but he was saying that the process of the application going through an admission office at college is as different as many as colleges there are out there. So every time it's a little bit different. And that's actually what's exciting on our side, I think, about, working with families, is we get to learn alongside families. Sometimes we certainly get to guide, we get to provide our experiences, and we're on the journey with you. So I hope you feel that that's the way this works. I want to introduce really briefly just a couple of my colleagues. You'll hear from Kalia Williams, who's been at Berkeley Carroll since 2015, and she's got both college and high school experience as well, working with students and shepherding them through the process. Mr. Almonte, Luis Almonte, came to us just last year and is the most recent person who came from the college side. So he's infused some great experiences. We all have worked at different institutions, so it's really wonderful to be able to share our thoughts and ideas. And he's become part of the Berkeley Carroll fabric very, very quickly. And then you'll also meet Ms. Dunn. And Ms. Dunn, Mary Dunn, has been at Berkeley Carroll for over 20 years, I'll say. And she helps run the system. I mean, she's our operations manager and very much fits that role, but is also someone who knows quite a bit about the process of applying to college. So I feel very confident in our team and very excited that we're able to share our expertise with you. This year is definitely an unusual year, and it's been both fun and exciting and a little bit nerve-wracking to go through the process with families. I think one of the things that I've noticed about the last several months in the college process is colleges have actually stepped up their game quite a bit, and the things that we're going to be able to bring with us from this time in a lockdown, in a pandemic, and all these things that have changed how colleges do things. I think we're going to be able to bring a lot of great technological advances and communication advances with us to the other side. Families have not had the opportunity as much to be able to go and visit colleges on their campuses. And hopefully by the time that your students are ready to embark on this process in in its more serious stage, that will be an opportunity that will be available. But the supplements that we have now, the opportunities to be able to learn from stories through YouTube, through student panels, through tours of facilities that you actually don't get to see on an actual tour. I'm hoping that we'll have those kind of wonderful opportunities available to students and to families as we go through the process. I've watched webinars and seminars all summer and spring and fall that have really covered every part of the admissions process. So we have access to even more in some ways than we've had before the pandemic. So that's pretty exciting. Mary, if you'll flip the slide to the next one, I want to talk a little bit about what we'll be talking about this morning. As we did for our previous meetings, we asked those who had RSVP'd to be able to give us some insight on what they wanted to hear about, what they were interested in talking about today. So we developed this agenda to cover those pieces, and that's how we formed our agenda. And then, as I said, we'll leave some room for questions at the end. You may have been able to attend previously the international education panel that we held jointly with the other Brooklyn area independent schools. We'll have a number of those that will happen throughout the rest of the year as well. So some of the specialized things that people might want to listen to, might want to talk about, you know, what is it like being an engineering student, more about financial aid, more about athletics. There will be specialized panels, and we'll make sure that we'll invite 9th through 12th grade to join us for those panels as well. But you can see before you, it's a pretty comprehensive agenda for today. And if you missed it, if you hadn't seen, I sent a reminder out this morning that has links to some handouts that we think will be really helpful. And of course, we're going to send a recording of this when we're done. Mary, will you switch to the next slide? I'm going to invite one of my colleagues to start on this slide. Ms. Williams?
Thank you. So I'm going to start by talking about the overview of the college process beginning in 9th grade and looking at 10th grade. So one thing that we've always believed in the college office, it's part of our philosophy, is that your students' prep for college actually begins from the moment they start at Berkeley Carroll. And that could be in pre-K 1 or 7th grade or even this past fall. We think they've been doing the work that's going to lead them to the college that's the best fit all along in their middle school and upper school experiences. And so when parents and students ask us, what should we be doing now? It sometimes comes off as a little glib to say like, oh, be a 9th grader or focus on your academics, get involved in extracurricular activities. But that's actually what we want students to be doing right now. We want students to focus on the things that are going to serve as the foundation for the more advanced work that they're going to do when they're juniors and seniors here at BC. But we're also thinking about the kind of work that they're going to be ready to do when they go to college. And all of that is happening right now for 9th graders and 10th graders. So for 9th graders, it's really important that they use this time to develop their academic interest, to work on time management skills. We interview all of our seniors before we write their letters of recommendation. And whenever I ask them how they've grown since 9th grade, I think probably 90% of the students have answered, oh, I'm much better at time management now. So they have a better sense of how they manage their academics, how they balance their fun with all of their extracurricular activity, or with all of their academic commitments. And I think that's a really important skill for them to be thinking about now. They learn to ask questions now. They learn how to be really good students, how to talk to their teachers, how to speak up in their classes, how to study for subjects. A student recently told me that when physics was really difficult for her, she had to sit down and evaluate her own academic learning process and change things to fit the class that was giving her a harder time. We think about the high school and the college process are really multi-layered. And so 9th grade is that foundational year, right? They're going to be exposed to many different kinds of learning opportunities. They start to take control over the activities that are most important to them. So you may notice your 9th grader saying, I don't want to do X anymore. I'm way more interested in Y. And that's really natural. We want them to do those things. When they get into 10th grade, it's another layer. It's the first time they have choice in what classes they're going to take. They'll start thinking about standardized testing and take their first pre-ACT or PSAT, and they'll also think about going into a semester away program. If we could have the next slide. And so 10th grade, this is when they start to have a lot of choice. They're going to choose their 10th grade electives in English and history. And I think it's also a time when they really start to develop their curiosity and their academic interests. Um, it's also when they start to deepen their commitment to their extracurricular activities. You'll see that your students might find themselves the co-leaders of a club. So I have a ninth grader who was not intending to be the co-leader of our club, and now she's already taken half the control of it from a senior who has sort of become wayward in her commitment. But this is really the time when I think 10th graders start to become a little bit more engaged in their academics. It's also when we introduce to them standardized testing, and we do so with full-length practice ACTs and practice SATs. You'll hear from us very soon about that for the 10th grade parents. We'll offer a testing overview in May for parents and guardians and students with Compass Prep. They're one of our many partners in standardized test prep. And then still students will think about what's right for them. Not every student takes the SAT, not every student takes the ACT. They choose one or the other, and they really choose the one that makes the most sense for them. And we offer classes here at Berkeley Carroll, and Carolyn will talk more about the standardized test prep, but we offer classes for them here at Berkeley Carroll. Some students will do online, well, now everybody does online classes, but students may do online classes, tutoring, or they might just pick up an SAT prep book and make that the way that they go. We also start to spend more time with your 10th graders. It's really the first bit of engagement they get with the college office. We're in the process of scheduling this time now, but they'll meet with us 3 times over the course of the next semester to start thinking about what it means to go to college. And while we won't really begin the process with them until they're 11th graders, it's the first time that they'll get to see us. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Almonte, to Lewis.
Thank you. Could we actually go to the next slide, Ms. Dunn? Perfect, thank you. So when the college process really begins is really in 11th grade. And that's really where the layers start being added to the college application process, the search process, all the research that the students have to do. So for instance, in 11th grade is when a student's assigned a college counselor and they begin having access to even more advanced classes and starting college visits. So we encourage students to continue pursuing advanced level coursework and excelling academically, as a transcript plays a vital role in the application review at colleges and universities, as well as developing interests outside of the classroom, both at Berkeley Carroll or with outside organizations. So I'll talk a little bit about extracurriculars on another slide, but for example, joining Key Society, maybe staying committed to athletics, being a part of co-curriculars, affinity groups, having a part-time job or an internship. That's just a few examples of what students can be thinking about doing or starting to do throughout their years at Berkeley Carroll. Throughout junior year, our office will meet with the entire junior class for community time. So similar to what Ms. Williams was talking about with the 10th graders, we continue to foster that relationship with the entire class through community time programming. And in past events, some programs that we've done are kind of facts and myths about the college search process. We've done College Jeopardy, which gets pretty intense. So we really are kind of trying to educate them about the college search process and get them ready for it in a fun way without inducing stress. So these sessions are basically introductory, and oftentimes we're allowing them to reflect on what it is that they're looking for in a college or university, or what they can see themselves doing as a potential field of study. In November of junior year, students will eventually create a profile for a system that we call SCORE, which assists them in navigating the college search process. So they do have the tools and resources provided by Berkeley Carroll to be able to navigate this process effectively. And then upon being assigned a counselor and completing an in-depth survey, they have their first initial college counseling meeting. And this meeting will begin to kind of dive into the intricacies of their search process, what they're looking for, how they're feeling. And after this conversation, the counselor creates a preliminary college list based on their intended major, interests, academic profile, curriculum, preferred geographic location, so on and so forth. So as you can see, it's a very in-depth process. Um, at this point, it's kind of a starting point for students to kind of start exploring different colleges and universities. In no way is this list a final list. It's very much a preliminary list, like we say, for students to kind of get their feet wet, start figuring out what they like and what they don't like, and then communicate with their college counselor about what they like about certain institutions. So that way we can kind of keep pointing them in the right direction and ultimately finalize their list. After this meeting, students will begin more formalized research on specific institutions by utilizing the score system, visiting college websites, using print resources. So it really is an ongoing process throughout junior year into senior year. So in terms of test prep, we do want students to kind of stay on top of that. This year we are in a test optional year, but that might not necessarily be the case. But students are still allowed to submit testing this year, and in more traditional years, most colleges or universities will either be test optional or test required. So students can use a broad, range of things in terms of preparing for standardized testing. So some students have been extremely successful using free prep through Khan Academy for the SAT, or others who are utilizing the ACT can use Kaplan Online. And by junior year, that's what we do the practice test for in 10th grade, is to help students understand which test they are performing better on, whether it's the SAT or the ACT. And we partner with an organization called Compass Prep that administers these practice tests and basically provides a diagnostic and a consultation to let the student kind of know which tests might be best to focus on. Realistically, it doesn't make sense for a student to focus on both tests because they're kind of stretching themselves pretty thin, because the SAT and ACT are very different type of tests. So we really counsel a student and we speak with them about the best methods and strategies to really ensure that they're moving forward with a test that is more inclined to the way that their brain works, basically. We also have, in terms of classes, Ms. Williams spoke about our partnership with Bespoke. So students will have the opportunity to either have a class in person or virtual, depending what that year might look like. We also have different partnerships, and we've seen great success with other organizations that Berkeley Carroll families have collaborated with. For instance, Focus Tutors, Revolution Prep, and that's just a couple to name a few, but we have a wide variety of resources that we provide students who are looking to be pointed in the right direction. Spring break during junior year is really when the majority of our students begin attending information sessions and campus tours, whether that's virtual or in person. They start to kind of identify which schools they want to research further and basically apply to in the future. A lot of times it's very easy for them to kind of check out a nearby school, a local school, and virtually they can attend a ton of information sessions and campus tours. But that 2-week period is after our first initial meeting with the student and the families, because we do incorporate the parents after our first initial meeting with the student. And basically, it's kind of a starting point for them to kind of start navigating the field of the college search process. We also, in more traditional years, when it was pre-COVID, we have a really great event called the Brooklyn Staten Island College Fair, which is obviously contingent upon social distancing regulations and health regulations. But this allows students to meet representatives from nearly 180 colleges. So we do a really great job of, advising the student to start their search process independently, but also Berkeley Carroll will have different events, whether they're virtual college visits or in-person college visits or college fairs that we actually organize to put the representatives in front of the students as well. And by the end of the junior year, we hope that students will have at least completed their activity section and the common application before we get the ball rolling and started with, hyper focusing on the different colleges and respective colleges that they are applying to. If I could have the next slide, please. So in 12th grade, they begin to add the final layers to their application process. So that's where they really start kind of writing and finalizing their essay, and communicating with colleges, finishing up final SATs and ACTs, hitting send on the common application, and then really completing the most challenging courses that they've enrolled in their high school career. And then ultimately, at the end of senior year, or the middle of senior year, deciding where they're going to enroll at. So the fall of the senior year is a busy time, and we encourage students to use the prior summer wisely. The summer months really are an ideal time to produce the draft of the common application, going into senior year. And Berkeley Carroll does a really great job of doing essay writing workshops. So myself, Ms. Williams, and Ms. Middleton will actually work with the students in terms of getting them geared up to start writing, because college essay writing is very different than analytical writing. But we also collaborate with different college admissions representatives and bring them to the students, whether they're virtually or in person, for them to also provide some insight and tips and tricks in terms of the writing process for the college application. After the first draft is produced, it really is where the editing process and the shaping process begins for the student. And summer is also a really important time where where students can prioritize visiting and researching colleges, as well as beginning the process for interviews for certain schools. So certain colleges and universities will require that students interview, some are optional. But that's really where students kind of start fostering a relationship with the college or university and really demonstrating that interest. That's a term that you'll hear in the college search process for the colleges and universities that they're thinking of applying to. We have a really great program called Reboot Camp, and that kind of serves as an event to allow the students to recalibrate and kind of get organized and start balancing both the college admissions process and a rigorous senior academic schedule. So over the course of the first semester, senior year, students begin meeting much regularly with their college counselor after Reboot Camp. But Reboot Camp really is, we look over the essay, we talk about different college and university related topics. And we really speak with them about kind of what the next steps are moving into senior year. A big discussion takes place during these months about if a student is thinking of applying early action, early decision, or regular decision. So to kind of break those down, from if nobody is familiar with those terms, early action is basically you can apply to a school for an earlier deadline and you find out earlier on than regular decision deadline, regular decisions being released at the end of April 1st. So a student can find out pretty early on if they're admitted, but there is no binding agreement that requires them to commit to the university. Early decision is more of that binding agreement. You're basically saying, you're my number one school. I love you. I want to go here. And if a student applies early decision, if they are admitted, basically there's an agreement that they're going to withdraw all their other applications, and then they're going to commit to going to that institution. It's a very nuanced process. It takes a lot of discussion, but a lot of times a student can find out by mid-December if it's early decision 1, or mid-February if it's early decision 2, where they're going. So a lot of times that process can wrap up quite early for a Berkeley Carroll student. And then the final decision is regular decision, which is a more traditional. You apply by January 1st. You find out by the end of March, early April, and then you have until May to commit to which school that you want. You can compare and contrast financial aid packages, and really kind of take a more in-depth look later in the spring during admitted student events about which school you want to attend. During this time throughout senior year, the college counselors are really working with students in terms of interview prep. We're doing multiple essay drafts and helping the students with short responses for colleges and universities. We're getting portfolio and abstract advice and pointing them in the right directions of how to develop those, as well as curating an activities list and shaping the college list for the student to make sure that it's balanced with reach schools, middle schools, as well as foundation schools. And if a student has applied early action or regular decision, they'll be able to analyze where they've been admitted by spring. And like I said, they can review financial aid packages if applicable, and revisit colleges during admitted student events in the spring to finalize where they'll be enrolling by May 1st. If I could have the next slide, please. And I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Middleton, who's going to talk about the application process.
Thank you, Mr. Almonte. So now that we've vaulted forward from 9th and 10th grade all the way through 12th grade, We didn't want to spend too much time talking about the application process, but we felt it was important for you to have an understanding of sort of what the application consists of. You know, what is the result in terms of what students are presenting to colleges. And so on the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see a number of different pieces of what comes together with the application process. I would say generally the most important factor when colleges are considering a student's admissibility, in traditionally looking at universities and colleges, one of the most important factors is the transcript. And the transcript isn't just a set of grades, it's also an assessment of a student's rigor, how much they've challenged themselves within the context of the schools that they're attending. So it's the whole academic history at Berkeley Carroll, like I said, including both the grades and the course selections, which might point to their academic rigor. And students will note, you know, once they begin to choose their classes for the next year and the year following and the year following that there are many opportunities to take advanced courses and to challenge themselves and to figure out what areas they want to challenge themselves most in, what areas are most important to them. So if we're thinking about sort of the parts and pieces of the application, wow. If we're thinking about the parts and pieces of the application, essentially what they'll have, in addition to that transcript, they'll have a narrative letter from the college counselor, which will highlight some of the areas of curricular choices. It will also speak to the student's strengths overall. And then once a student selects teachers to write on their behalf, the teacher recommendations will speak to very specific areas of inquiry. So we have always recommended that students ask teachers from 2 disciplines, perhaps pairing a teacher from humanities with a math or science teacher if appropriate. And the teachers, dictated by the colleges, they're expected to ask teachers from their 11th and 12th grades. So ideally there might be a student who's asked their humanities teacher they may have had in 10th grade, and then they have them again in 12th grade, or a math teacher that they've had as a junior, or a science teacher or a language teacher. So we help students to choose those, and they make those requests actually at the end of the junior year, so that teachers have plenty of time to be able to write those letters and have everything all ready to go. So teacher and counselor letters of recommendation are something that will come a little bit later. They provide a lot more nuance to the application. And I always think about it as you've got your transcript, which is a flat piece of paper. It provides the bumps along the way, the details, the nuances, and the things that really bring the student's ability and skills to the forefront. On the application, students will also have opportunities to indicate their activities and what they've been involved in. And the applications themselves, the common application is the most popular application that our students will use, because nearly 1,000 colleges utilize that application. But we also have students who will apply to schools that have their specific applications, or school systems, like, for example, the University of California system that has its own application. But generally, there are about 8 to 10 slots that a student can fill with their extracurricular activities. And we'll talk a little bit about how to build that list of activities. But as Mr. Almonte has said a little bit earlier, it starts with what students are doing in school, their co-curricular activities, their affinity groups that they're involved with, things that they might be doing during the summers. And colleges definitely recognize that these first couple of summers for your students, given the pandemic, is going to be very different from what they've experienced in the past. So there shouldn't be concern about consistency or about a lack of opportunity. Students will have the ability to build their resume over the course of their time. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we do to help students build their list. I am going to talk more about standardized testing. That's what those stars mean. We're going to talk a little bit about standardized testing, about dates for testing, and so forth. But I do want to talk a little bit about how Berkeley Carroll helps students and families build this application. I like to think about it as providing A through Z support. So when we've got students that we're beginning to meet with, especially our first individual meetings with students, and to outline sort of when that begins to happen, next week we're going to begin to meet with our first juniors. So we begin to talk with them individually about what they're doing, building that college list. I mentioned already that we write that comprehensive letter of recommendation. We coach them on selecting teachers to write on their behalf. But we do everything from mock interviews with students who are preparing for alumni or on-campus or virtual interviews. And we also do a lot of work with them on essay writing, building their essay, editing their essays, and their supplements. So really focusing each of our attention as counselors on each of their schools. In addition to thinking about this as sort of providing the A through Z on what of support services, I also think about it in terms of meeting families and students where they are. So sometimes this process can feel confusing and it can feel really difficult to navigate. Sometimes it feels much more smooth for families that have been through it before, but we're here to meet families where they are, meet students where they are, and ensure that they are building a list that makes sense, tapping into our own professional experiences, tapping into statistics that we have at our fingertips, both from national resources and from our internal resources. So we believe that the work that we provide in helping families to make decisions about all these things is pretty comprehensive overall. Mary, if you'll move it to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about how colleges view transcripts overall, but in particular Berkeley Carroll transcripts. When I was on the college side in the 4 universities where I worked in admissions, the 2 words that I would use very often when talking about how colleges view transcripts or how my individual college was viewing transcripts, we talked about our process as being holistic. So counting all of those parts and pieces that you saw on that last page, but also being very much related to or very much more reliant on context. So really thinking about what are the opportunities that the student has available to them in their high schools, and how has the student taken advantage of that? So as we develop our materials that we send to colleges, we're very clear about what our advanced courses are, how students gain access to them, what's a typical or what's a more advanced selection of courses. And for the colleges, it's a document called the school profile. And that document helps to really guide their understanding of curriculum at all schools across the US and outside the US. When you think about how many secondary schools are out there and how many different kinds of academic programs there are, it's a very important source to be able to, for the colleges to be able to know what's expected of a student at a particular school, what pathways are available, and then how did that student take advantage of it. Every year we're talking with students, especially as they get into their junior year and in their senior year, about their course selections. And I always remind them about making sure that they are taking a rigorous set of courses, but also a balanced set of courses. Taking rigorous courses doesn't mean being at the advanced level in everything. But for some students, there might be opportunities where they want to pursue specific areas of coursework that are going to be more advanced, that perhaps lead to outcomes like research papers or presentations like our SRD and Senior Scholars programs. You'll hear more about these programs over the course of the next couple of years, especially at the curriculum nights that are run by the upper school. So we always think about this in terms of appropriate rigor in context and a balance of rigor, and making sure that students are taking on a load of courses that they can do well in as well. So which grades count? For some schools, this will be a little bit different. For most colleges and universities, especially in the US, we're talking about grades 9 through the mid-year of the senior year. So we don't calculate a GPA because I don't want colleges to focus just on one cumulative number, but colleges do see grades on that transcript, and they will often see trends in grades. If a student makes a couple of mistakes in 9th grade, building that trend and building their curriculum, building their successes is going to mean quite a bit to colleges overall. For other colleges, they might say we count grades in 10th through 12th. They might say we're looking just at academic courses. If it's an art school or a performance-based program, they may be spending a lot more time looking at a portfolio or an audition. So there's various ways that students are being assessed for their success in this process. I can say that our school profile that outlines our curriculum and shows colleges how we do things at Berkeley Carroll has been complemented by quite a few colleges, especially as they're working with other high schools, other independent schools. There's a big movement toward moving away from the advanced placement curriculum. And I've had several colleges that have said they've used our school profile as a document to help other high schools make that transition and be able to show their program in a way that really helps them understand the curriculum and how students have choices. I think part of our advising program in the upper school, when students are working with the deans and working with their advisors, and they're really thinking about their selections during those course curriculum nights, it really does set a course for the 4 years, because they are encouraged to think about what they're doing in sophomore year and beyond, what they're doing in junior year and beyond. And then of course in senior year, in preparation for what might prepare them best for not only the college application process, but also for the curriculum on the college side. Lastly, on this slide, how about a semester program or a year abroad? If these programs are, hopefully they will continue to be available to our students, because they do provide not only perspective for that student to be able to step away from their experience at BC and figure out who they are and assess their own abilities. They also are really interesting programs for colleges to see in a student's portfolio. Students challenging themselves in an environment that's very different from their home school, they often come to college with tools that allow them to really adapt very well to a new community. So we find that students who take advantage of these semester programs, or even the few that take advantage of doing a year abroad during their junior year, really have some great successes in the college process. Ms. Dunn, if you'll forward this one more slide. I want to talk a little bit about standardized testing. And I mentioned that in my reminder this morning, I sent a link to a standardized testing handout, which I think will provide you some pretty good knowledge and some pretty good ideas of when students are taking tests. We also provided an overview of what tests are out there and sort of what they consist of. So prior to your student in the sophomore year spring taking those full-length practice exams for the ACT and the SAT, and then your juniors will take the PSAT as well, this document will provide you with a little bit more insight into how those exams are organized. So I separated this slide into sort of what happened in terms of standardized testing in a more normal testing year. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about how things changed for this year and what might happen as we move along. So in the 2019-2020 application year, so it was just last year, there were no subject tests required by colleges. There were about 12 highly selective colleges that recommended subject tests. And these tests, just to give you a sense, they're offered in about five different academic areas. You've got your math, your science, your English, your history, and your language courses. So those 5 areas and some subsets. They've really fallen out of favor than compared to 25 years ago or so, when you used to see the achievement tests or the subject tests being sort of the expectation for many colleges. We do still recommend that students pursue the SAT and ACT, whether a school is testing optional or not. What we found this year, though, is those subject tests have become even less important in the US college application process. So what will we see in the future? Hard to know. I think big changes have certainly happened already in the use of subject tests. And in terms of tests in say the sophomore, tests that, Mary, if you can click on the one that says morning coffee, yeah. If we're talking about tests that colleges are still likely going to require in the next year, those would be the SAT and the ACT exam. Subject tests can be a way for a student, if they have an exceptional ability in a certain area, if they're a huge history aficionado, if they've gone in depth in a language, if their natural strengths are literature, they can be a way for a student to be able to set themselves apart in the application process. So for the schools, those 12 or so that as of last year, we're still recommending those subject tests, that is a way for a college to be able to say, okay, this student did exceptionally well in this particular subject area. But by and large, as I said, most schools are not considering those tests overall. The one caveat I'll make is for those of you that are thinking about international educational systems. So we do have a number of students each year who will be looking at schools in the United Kingdom or in Canada. And there are schools that will utilize those subject tests in place of either AP or the A-level exams in the case of the colleges in the UK. The A-level system, or the GCE system, is a different one than ours, as is the International Baccalaureate system, as are many other systems outside the US, but a substitution in many cases for the AP or other subject matter exams has been those subject tests in years past. So they are something that's still relevant for those colleges and universities that are outside the US. So each family is going to be different in this regard in terms of what exams they will pursue. Most of these exams are taken by students, and if we're thinking about them nationally and internationally, most of these exams are taken by students in the junior year. So that's something to kind of keep on that radar if it's a necessity and if it's a possibility that your student especially might be looking outside the US for colleges. The point that I listed here on the right-hand side, where in years past, or actually this past year, it was a little over 1,100 colleges that offer the option of going testing optional. So for a student to not need to submit an SAT or ACT. This year, in such a unique and unusual year, it's over 665 colleges that have gone testing optional. Still, most of our students are submitting testing. So we have a few more students this year who have chosen to not pursue exams at all, but we still will encourage students to take those exams if they have access to them. And we've actually made special arrangements for both the current senior class and the current junior class to take those exams at Berkeley Carroll. Ms. Dunn, if you'll switch to the next. So I wanted to, this may feel a little bit overwhelming because it's a little bit far in the future, but I wanted to be able to give you a sense of how many options there are for testing. Generally, what we'll recommend about how many times a student takes the SAT or ACT fits with what colleges would say and fits with what the research from those testing agencies would say. They always recommend, and we always recommend, that students take these exams more than once, but not more than 3 times. Statistically, according to the testing agencies, the ability of a student to score higher on a 4th or a 5th exam does not outweigh what it might appear to colleges if they are offering testing information that has 5 or 6 tests. They would much prefer a student to do their best on those exams and then, of course, spend their time working on their coursework. There's an intensity involved in taking these tests for too many times and spending those weekends in testing centers where they can be better spent those weekends working on their work for the classroom. The transcript, as I said before, is always the most important piece of the process. So you can see there's ample dates for testing. Hopefully, as I said, by the time that your students are ready to be able to take these tests, the opportunities will be available through the national testing centers, and we'll see fewer or any cancellations of those tests. The earliest that I find students will end up taking the SAT or ACT, and this is, again, dependent upon what their results were for those full-length practice tests that we offer in the spring of the sophomore year. The earliest we see them taking it is in the fall of the junior year. And these are real tests. These are not just practice ones. So we have some students who will take the ACT or SAT in those earlier dates that you see before you, some that will take their first test in the spring. And certainly that February ACT date and that March SAT date are probably our most popular dates in terms of when students start to take their testing. We've mentioned a little bit before that we not only advise students on different kinds of options for test prep. Certainly we have families who will utilize tutoring services, who will work one-on-one with students, either virtually or, if the opportunity is available, in person. We offer classes on campus, which this year are going to be virtual. And the classes that we are offering on campus this year, just to give you a sense, they take place over the course of a few months, and they'll prepare the students for that March SAT, the earliest ACT, and then it will actually continue after those dates so that students will have the opportunity to continue to be refreshed in the kind of preparation that they need to take those exams for later dates in the spring. So we feel like we do a pretty comprehensive overview of testing, provide enough opportunities for students to have their practice exams in hand, in addition to advising them on what timeline is going to be appropriate. We rely a little bit on Compass Prep to provide their expertise as well. We mentioned about the full-length exams, but in addition, what Compass Prep will provide for our families is an overview of testing in the spring of the sophomore year. So usually in the month of May, which will really help families to gain an understanding of the whole landscape of standardized testing. Mary, if we can switch to the next slide, that would be great. And I'm going to pass this over to one of my colleagues. I can't remember if Mr. Almonte or Ms. Williams is going to take on this slide. Mr. Almonte, take it away.
So in terms of extracurricular activities, we've mentioned this a couple times throughout the presentation. Then the reality is when we're thinking about extracurricular activities, it's a lot to take on with just thinking about what our students do day to day. Our students are very much overscheduled. They're in a rigorous academic curriculum. So we're very understanding of that. And given that there are only 24 hours in the day and at some point they need to sleep, it's important that they choose their extracurricular activities wisely. And it really is about, understanding what commitments are important to them and really kind of personifying that to the admissions committees throughout their application. A really engaged student in a sustained activity with leadership, if something that they're passionate about, is going to look a lot more impressive than a student that's in, say 15 different activities, but is just a member, maybe only dedicating 1 hour a week for 1 week out of the year. When it comes to extracurricular activities, it's important that students are pursuing experiences and organizations that excite them, but also help them discover new things about themselves and the world around them. They also do this every year at every day at BC in community engagement, co-curriculars they choose, and in their classes. So this is going to give the college admissions committees a really in-depth look at who your child is and who our students are in terms of not just what classes that they're taking, but also the things that they're involved in. The summer should be used to continue the discovery process, but even more because they have even more time and freedom. And this can take the form of a pre-college program, international travel, a part-time job, community service that really speaks to them. There's a variety of different things that they can do throughout the summer. Obviously, we are in very different times right now, and we don't know what the world will look like from year to year. And in the midst of a pandemic, colleges and universities understand that students might not be as involved because of things, for instance, like Zoom fatigue, not being able to leave the house, health concerns, social distancing regulations. So extracurricular involvement looks very different during a time like this, during a pandemic. So for example, this year, one of Miss Middleton's seniors decided to learn Russian. And another one of her students took a free online course titled Magic in the Middle Ages. I had a student that decided to work on their art portfolio. So they took an online kind of program, online class on illustration and another one on portfolio designing at Pratt Institute. And she actually created her whole art portfolio for her college application during the summer. We've had other students who have learned to, play the guitar. There's some students who have taken up DJing. And a lot of times these might seem like I have another student that read like 92 books or throughout the year, but majority of those were in the summer. So it's a lot of context that we're able to provide. And students are really picking up different types of skills, whether it's learning American Sign Language, taking online courses, or really just kind of providing an in-depth understanding of why they weren't able to be involved. But we really do push our students to kind of hone some type of skill, focus on some type of hobby, because it might not be an organized activity, but it's still them stimulating themselves and pushing themselves to be a better person and to really kind of engage in something that they're really interested about. When they have the chance to communicate this part of their lives, what will stand out to colleges is not the number of activities, but the commitment a student has made to a select few, or the commitment that they've made to certain things during a difficult time. And in this case, depth and context is way more important than the amount of things that they're involved in. If I could have the next slide, please. So eventually, students will be engaging in campus visits, whether that's early on, kind of informally or more formally throughout junior and senior year. One thing that we want to address is that COVID-19 has restricted travel options during the pandemic. So I'd like to take the time to speak about conducting college research virtually as well as in person. So virtual visits are the most accessible way for students to experience a college campus during this current pandemic. We've actually been really impressed, and I think that we've talked about how colleges have been stepping up their game, but we've really been impressed with the way that colleges are reaching out to students during this time. A lot of colleges and universities have completely revamped their recruitment process to be not just in person, but also more virtual options. There are a variety and a plethora of different opportunities, such as like virtual information sessions. Um, and a number of schools are making current students more available to prospective students through virtual panels and kind of one-on-one virtual conversations that students can have either with admissions reps or with current students. There are even some schools that will allow you to take a virtual tour with a current student. So the student's actually on campus and they're actually taking you around campus through a computer screen or through a phone, which is really, really great. Um, Berkeley Carroll also hosts, this is something that we want to address, is that we've been hosting colleges and universities throughout fall of for seniors. So throughout the fall of senior year, students have the opportunity to meet with representatives more traditionally one-on-one in person. But this year we actually hosted a number of different schools, which were the number was pretty on par with what we usually do in person. All through virtual Zoom meetings, which was really great. So Berkeley Carroll, like I said, does a really great job of bringing the college representatives to the students if the students feel like it's inaccessible. Aside from that, regardless of the circumstances, we want to ensure all of you that we're adequately prepared to consult families on how to conduct thorough research in person, but also from the comfort of your own home outside of a computer, right on a computer screen. So this year, I think, is very much a testament to that. I think our seniors have adapted very, very well, as well as the College Counseling Office has been really great in being able to understand what colleges and universities are offering as virtual events and being able to advise students and counsel students on what virtual events to take advantage of. And contingent upon social distancing and travel regulations being lifted, most students begin to visit colleges in the spring of their junior year. So like I said a little earlier, around spring break is really kind of where that starts. And after having an initial meeting with their college counselor, they'll have a better idea of how to start that process. In 9th and 10th grade, it's not necessary to plan trips around, say formalized college tours. Usually if you have a 9th grader or 10th grader sitting in a college information session in person, by 11th or 12th grade, the institution could be completely different. Or to be frank, a lot of times your student probably has forgotten what the institution is about. So more formalized tours when they're in the college mindset allows them to retain more of the information and understand how it's more specialized towards their interests. But regardless of that, in 9th and 10th grade, it doesn't hurt for colleges and universities to be kind of placed in front of a student in some way, shape, or form. So, if you find yourself on a family trip to say, like, let's say Iowa, or more than likely, it's probably going to be like California or the Northeast region of the United States. It's not a bad idea to schedule a tour at a school in the area, just so that they can at least see the campus. They might not every student's going to remember everything that's said about the school 3 years later. Or a lot of times just driving through a particular college campus or stopping at it and walking through it for 5 or 10 minutes really allows a student to kind of see what a college campus is like, how big they can be, what a traditional campus is versus a more city-like campus. So it really does go the mile for them to kind of understand and have some groundwork before they actually start in 11th grade. Touring a variety of colleges and universities will help students narrow down their interests. And a lot of students will start at Berkeley Carroll saying, like, I don't want a liberal arts college. I want to go to a really big school. I want to go to a large size institution. I don't want a liberal arts college. They keep repeating that, and then by the end of their process, they're only looking at liberal arts colleges. So that's not to say that always happens, but even if your students think that they absolutely don't want, say, like a liberal arts college or maybe an all women's college, it may be a good idea to see at least one locally so they can have a real sense of whether or not that really isn't the best fit. Touring maybe a public institution or a private institution, it really does go the mile to show them the different variety of schools that are out there to, again, to kind of help them understand what they are looking for. And there's a variety of different options just here in our backyard in New York City and the New York metro area. So I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Williams to talk about some of the schools that are in the area.
We can have the next slide, please. One thing I also want to reiterate is that, it's great when 9th and 10th graders go visit colleges. They're going to be completely different people by the time they really start to get into the college search. They'll have already started to really have a sense of what they want to study and who they are and what's important to them. So that's, something that they saw in 9th grade might be completely out of the realm of their interest by the time they're juniors in high school. But we did want to remind you of a bunch of options that you have if you want to do some local visits. And of course, because of COVID, many schools are not doing in-person tours, although some schools are doing in-person tours. But you can go visit a large public university like CUNY Hunter. You could go visit a small liberal arts college like Sarah Lawrence in the suburbs. Not all women, it is co-ed. Just want to put a plug in for my alma mater. Or you want to see a small liberal arts college in an urban setting, that might be Eugene Lang. So we want students to know all of the options that are available to them. You can easily, like Lewis said, go do a 10-minute campus tour by walking around on your own when the campus is maybe not, even if the campus isn't open to visitors necessarily for formal visits. We've had many of our seniors do just that, take a trip up to Boston and drive around a college campus. That's been really of great interest to them to get a sense of what's there. But one thing that a lot of colleges have done, and sort of leaning back on that virtual experience, is some students have been able to sign up for live tours with a current student at the university or college using their camera phone and taking students around campus. So again, you have a lot of options that you can go visit here in the city and just outside of the city. But virtually right now, if a student wants to get a sense of what their possibilities might be, they can actually get a lot done just by logging into their computer or going onto their phone. And we want to encourage students to take all of those opportunities. And if we could have the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn to talk a little bit about what resources you have available to you now.
Well, hi again, everybody. We're just about to the end of our presentation this morning, and we've had a number of folks asking questions in the Q&A, and I really appreciate that. We are going to send not only a recording of this, but also a PDF of this presentation. So this resources page will be more useful if you have the information right there in front of you. These are just a few of the links, the virtual information that is available for students and for families as they begin the college search. Way back in the beginning of our conversation, we talked a little bit about how we introduce students to a tool called SCORE, and it's a web-based platform that our juniors begin using as they are beginning to do the research on colleges. There are many other resource tools out there and many other ways to begin to just explore on the college search as well. College Scorecard in particular is one that provides a lot of data information. So it'll give you, it's a government created website that will give you all the statistical information, everything from graduation rates to retention rates to percentage of students on financial aid. All of that information is available in sort of a regimented, more less exciting form, I would say, on that site. College Board, the folks that do the SAT and the PSAT, have a pretty good search engine on their site. So if you or your student are just wanting to think about, what if I say I only want schools in Maine that offer environmental science, it can build a list. But remember that later on, we'll be working with you and your student to build a list based upon the place that they're in at that point in time. So the place that they're in the middle of the junior year, having grades under their belts, having some testing under their belts and having some self-knowledge under their belts as well. But if you're interested in doing some exploration, it's a great tool. Compass Prep, we've mentioned them a couple of times. They're not our only partner in testing, but we do think that they provide some really good information. And they have this guide that they pull together every year. It's, gosh, about 80 pages or so. And it'll tell you everything you never wanted to know about testing. It's very, very comprehensive. So I'll send a link to that as well. And you'll have these links, obviously. But there's resources for very specific kinds of information and support that you'll find. The LGBTQ resource that we've listed here, the HBCU First site is brand new and it's gorgeous, and it does a great job of introducing students to the historically Black colleges and universities. Financial aid site, it's called finaid.org. They do a great job of, again, giving an overview of financial aid and how it works. And remember, we do a lot of programming around a number of these things as well. So for example, we do a financial aid night every year, and we invite families from 9th through 12th grade to join us. We'll typically do that in the fall, but through our joint programming with the independent schools in Brooklyn, we also will generally have some spring events as well. And then finally, one of the great resources for outside scholarships, and probably the biggest and most comprehensive one, if a student is looking for a scholarship that will fit them as a left-handed person who wants to study anthropology, and were born in Alaska, there's probably a scholarship out there for them, but they're not all as specific as that. But it's probably one of the biggest, most comprehensive scholarship sites that are available. And then finally, I posted here a couple of sort of covers of books that we will often recommend. The two on either side, the FISC Guide to Colleges 2021, the best 386 colleges, last year it was 385, the year before it was 384. So they're finding more and more best colleges out there. Those tools, one or the other, they're examples of what we recommend in the junior year. I mean, certainly that's something that is accessible from libraries and bookstores now, but they're comprehensive guides that give families about 2 or 3 pages about each college. And they send out questionnaires to current college students and get information about each of those campuses. So it's every kind of bit of information that you'd want to know. What's social life like? What are highlighted academic programs? All of that information is available through these guides, and they're pretty comprehensive in terms of which schools they cover. They do include some schools in the UK and in Canada as well. The book that we've listed here right in the middle, Colleges That Change Lives, one of the reasons that we suggest this book is it really helps families to think about the education at colleges, not necessarily just about getting into college. And they provide some really unique examples of college campuses around the US, around the country. Most of them are small liberal arts college campuses, but it can provide a great bit of insight into the kind of education that's happening out there. I think there's been so many innovations in how colleges deliver their educational resources. I mean, certainly this year with the challenges that we've been facing with the pandemic, but generally how colleges have distinguished themselves from one another is a pretty interesting bit of research to begin on even now. And if you'd like some more resources, we're happy to provide some more examples. There's definitely lots of books on how the college search process works, and other ways to be able to think about the college search. So we're happy to provide those tools as well. And with that, I think our next slide is just questions. So we don't have the opportunity to open it up to everybody. I think everybody's muted, but hopefully we've had the chance to answer your questions that you've had online. You can certainly follow up with us if you've got further questions that are more individual to you. I'll answer a couple of questions that are on our Q&A right now. One, I mentioned one of the participants asked about taking a December test and if there's spaces and if it's an advantage to take a December test. And I said there can be an advantage of getting a seat in a national test center. All I meant with that is it's a less popular date, so there often are more spaces. That's if we're not suffering from the same kind of cancellation of testing opportunities that we've seen this spring and this fall. So it's really just about seats in a national test center. Generally, the way that students are taking SATs and ACTs, they're actually registering at schools that are local. So you look up the testing site that's closest to your home, and it's a national testing center, in that the College Board or ACT has a relationship with them, and they test students from multiple different schools.
So there's another question that it seems like BC has some favorite colleges where several students go, and do we have special relationships with some schools? So actually, I think one of the things that we're really proud of in the college office is just how expansive our students' college lists are. I would say last year, for example, we had many students get really excited about the University of Madison, Wisconsin, and several enrolled there. And we also had, a few students get excited about Wesleyan, and that's an equally popular school for some of our students. I don't think there's their favorite colleges that our students apply to or go to, but there are certainly schools that our students are drawn to. And I think part of that is, given what they experience here at Berkeley Carroll, right? So they may have, like, the fact that they've had so much choice in their academic experience here, that they want to mirror that in their college choices or when they leave us. And so, I don't think, there's only one kind of school that a Berkeley Carroll student goes to or that they prefer. I think we did the numbers, and our students have applied to over 280 colleges. Is that right, Carolyn? Oh, you're muted. Yeah. Okay. And then are there schools that we have a special relationship with? I think one thing that we also value is the fact that we make it a point to get to know our college reps. So whether or not they visit us in person, or if we had just the virtual visits, which was what we had this fall, we make it a point to be in the room with every college rep who comes through the Berkeley Carroll community for a few minutes to help them understand our community, to help them understand our students and our academic profile. So it's not so much that we have special relationships, although I think between the three of us, we probably have dozens of friends who work at colleges across the country and across the globe. When a student sends their application, that's the thing that matters. It's the work that they've done in their classes. It's, if they're submitting testing, what that testing looks like within the college's academic profile. I think colleges are aware that Berkeley Carroll is a great school, that we have a really strong academic curriculum, and those are the things that count, not necessarily. I think the myth of the relationship between college offices is something that probably existed like in the 60s or 70s, and then now is not really a thing in that same way.
And I think this brings us to our close.
Oh, we have one more question. So in the UK, where we are from, there is a big focus on achievement in sport, but the summer activities don't focus on this. Is there less emphasis on this for US colleges? I think it really depends on the student. Not every student is going to, some of our students choose not to participate in an athletic sport, and they may do PE all 4 years. For US colleges, the sports that you participate in get counted as part of your extracurricular activities. So achievement in sport is only really important if you plan on playing a sport in college, if you want to be a recruited athlete.
The only thing that I'll add to that, because I remember that there was a question that asked about service and doing community service or community engagement. And sometimes families have a sense that students have to do either everything, or that there's like check boxes that they must complete, like every college is going to want community service. In the US and in the application process, it tends to be more about a student's development of interests rather than it being about check boxes. So sometimes you'll have a student that is incredibly devoted to maybe service, maybe sport, maybe it's that they're incredibly devoted to learning about invertebrate animals. It may be that they're incredibly devoted to their interest in another area. And the extracurricular activities list tends to develop a little bit more organically along those lines. So it doesn't mean that every student should have just one thing that they focus on. No, more of our students are involved in multiple things just because they're interesting kids and they have lots of different interests. And sometimes they change those interests. So, sometimes there's a concern, well, my student has decided not to continue with basketball, but they're doing this incredible internship that has really engaged their career interests and their academic interests. And that kind of a switch is actually okay for colleges as well. It is important to have sort of that depth of involvement, but sometimes decisions make sense when somebody has switched off on something. And I also have found that especially this year, and I mentioned this a little bit before, but it's worth reiterating, especially this year, colleges do understand that everything is not going to be the same in terms of what students may have been able to do during summers or during even during the school year in terms of their involvement. They're living similar lives to what we're living. So they understand that it's not possible to do some of the things that they've been able to do in the past, but we're really proud of what students have been able to do and what they've been able to access. You heard Mr. Almonte give some examples of what some of our seniors have been able to do in a critical summer, the junior year summer, with the way that they've been able to sort of switch over and do something a little bit different than what they may have planned on doing in the past.
And I guess like the last thing I would add is, it makes that question makes me think of a student from a couple of years ago who really loved soccer, but wasn't the greatest player, but did play on our JV team. But he also kept a blog about the World Cup when it happened. And the writing in that blog was really amazing, and the detail, and that was something he could share with colleges and something I could write about in my letter of recommendation. So it doesn't always have to be the highest achievement on a field or on the court, but it could be how they sort of integrate that interest into other things that they do.
So with that, we will thank you for your attention. Hopefully we have not kept you past the hour of when you need to be somewhere else. We really, really appreciate your attendance here today. And as I said, we'll send a follow-up with the recording and the resources to make sure that you have all of that at your fingertips. Thank you so much for joining us.